threatened the religious leadership of that day, the religious oppressors, the villains. He intentionally, he wasn't telling necessarily a true story, but used as an example to show us the way, right? So Jesus was intentional about describing this kind of relationship and the power dynamic. Jesus understood race as a human construct, whereas God sees everyone wholly in equality and in the beauty of all creation. So ironically, Jesus was executed at the demand of religious fundamentalists. Why? Because religious fundamentalists need to feel superior as they argue their divine selection as God's chosen to judge the world. The devil is a liar. Jesus, on the other hand, makes it clear that he came to love people and not to condemn them. So why am I here? Because religious fundamentalists could never have achieved their goals in our nation without the assistance of political power. That's right. Just as in the early church era, powerful religious insiders could not have successfully executed Jesus without the political pragmatism of the Roman Empire. To ensure Pax Romana, or as I like to call today, Pax Americana, which means those in power stay in power for the sake of peace. Supremacists and religious fundamentalists need the power of empire. So by contrast, Jesus was not a friend to the empire. I hope you knew that. But a champion of the marginalized, the ostracized, and the enslaved, offering them justice and freedom through salvation. Over the last several decades, access to information about changing globalization has revealed to us the inequalities of nations, races, and social economics. As a diverse world rises, white Christian nationalists find their privileges diminishing as an equal playing field rises and emerges. Right now, this very moment, our Supreme Court of the United States is trying to decide affirmative action. Affirmative action is on the line. So as people of good faith, what can we do? I ask myself the question. 2, what can I do? Well, I can continue to follow the true mission of Jesus, who wanted to bring the will of God to earth as it is in heaven. And we should not back down in the face of hate that is leading this evil, unholy reformation, as I call it. I believe, and I've got to believe, I just got to believe, Bishop Dwayne, that Jesus' wish to bring God's shalom, wholeness to this earth is still possible. As I shared earlier in our discussion, as we've been traveling on this freedom bus tour, that I'm having a good time, I hope y'all know that white Christian nationalism is very rooted in maintaining income inequality. Jesus spoke more often about the poor than any other issue, beginning his ministry by declaring, "I have come to give good news to the poor." In an age where income inequality continues to grow, the church and faith communities need to lift up the poor and support policies that advance opportunities for advancement and livable wages. I believe we, the faith community, must be an impactful ministry of presence to speak up, particularly for health care, which is still on the ballot. Today I'm reminded that Jesus was walking as a witness for healing the sick, regardless of their financial means or pre-existing conditions.
Come on here.
The Gospel of Matthew records Jesus went through Galilee, teaching in the synagogues and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom and curing every disease and every sickness among the people. So living in this most prosperous country in history, it remains perplexing why some Christians still oppose universal health care for all of our citizens. And we must speak up and undergird interfaith cooperation. That's why I love Power and the work of what Power is doing, because even as a Christian, I must realize and understand the responsibility to interact and engage with other people and other faiths and not just my own. If we are to live within a peaceful and a harmonious community, then we must learn from one another and pray for one another and celebrate one another. And we've got to continually do this in every way. I leave you with this. I grew up in Philadelphia, Northwest Philadelphia, born and raised. And there was a Lutheran pastor that some of you may know named Carter McGrath. And he was kind of like our Lutheran Mr. Rogers. He was called Captain Noah. And Captain Noah, every week, every Saturday morning, when there was cartoons on Saturday morning, that doesn't happen much anymore, would sing a song that says, red and yellow, pink and green, purple, orange, and blue. Y'all remember the song? I can sing a rainbow, sing a rainbow, sing a rainbow too. And in that song was an invitation that I want us to be reminded of as we're continuing to do this work. He said, or the song says, listen with your eyes and listen with your ears and sing everything that you see. I can sing a rainbow, sing along with me. As we continue to build this coalition, I'll leave you with the tagline of my church tradition. This is God's work, but it's our hands. Amen. Amen.
I just want to spend a couple of minutes giving you a non-Christian perspective on white Christian nationalism. Who are you? I am Rabbi Mordecai England. Thank you, Elder Melvin. I am a senior advisor on the parish staff.
I'm thinking it might just be in the way.
Well, from a non-Christian perspective, white Christian nationalism is terrifying. It is absolutely terrifying. My grandparents, aunts, and uncles were all murdered by white Christian nationalists. Right? I grew up with no cousins because they were murdered by white Christian nationalists. White Christian nationalism is terrifying. Yes. I was in Charlottesville. I was face to face with neo-Nazis screaming in my face, Jews will not replace us. What they want to do to this country is terrifying. They want to take away the rights of all gay and lesbian people. They want to take away the rights of all women. They want to take away the rights of all Muslims. They want to take away the rights of all Jews. They want to deny freedom to the majority of this country. They are not a joke. They are well connected to the most powerful forces in this country. This is not a grassroots movement. This is a leadership-led movement. There has been a right-wing white Christian nationalist Bible study in Congress for the last dozen or more years, all about taking over this country. There is nothing benign about it. They are serious about political power. They know how to get political power. They have strategies to get political power. This is not some haphazard event. This did not come out of nowhere. Some would say it might be baked into the DNA of this country. When the Pilgrims were on the Mayflower, they said they wanted to build a city on the hill. That was white Christian nationalism right there. From the very origins of this country was the idea of building a white Christian country that would only be for them and they would be in charge. Same thing happened further south with slavery. They wanted to build a white Christian country where they were in charge. And that has been part of the soul, the DNA of this country from day one. From the moment the Europeans arrived on this shore. That's what the doctrine of discovery was all about. When the Pope said to the Portuguese and the Spanish, you are allowed to kill, enslave, or rob from the Saracens, the Muslims, the enemies of Christ, the Jews, and the barbarians, the Africans. So right there, white Christian nationalism, the Jews, the Muslims, people of Africa, all could be murdered, enslaved, and robbed for the sake of the Catholic Church. Right? Day one. That's who we are. So their dreams are coming to fruition. This is political. This is about power. And it's our job to do what we can to contest for power. That's what we are. We are in a contest for power right now. And that's why we are traveling across this state. To remind people that this election is a contest for power. It is a really clear choice, especially in the state of Pennsylvania. And we have to do everything that we can to make sure that we are in that fight for power and that we win. And that whatever our personal stumbling blocks are, whatever our reticence is to talk to our friends and neighbors, we have to get past that. We have to step past our shyness. This is not a time for shyness. This is not a time for our own personal neurosis. This is not a time for self-indulgence. This is a time for saying, I will take this step. I must, because everything is at stake right now. Thank you. So after I did that, I have to do the opposite. I have to remind us that we are strong and powerful, and that we are connected to each other and to God. So if you would close your eyes for a moment, please, and take a nice full breath, and take another one. And please uncross your arms and legs and put your feet flat on the floor. Just feel your feet on the floor. Breathe in the beams of this church. The beams of this church are hundreds of years old. The church itself is over 100 years old. This wood, trees were planted probably 400 or 500 years ago. And as you connect to this building, think of all the prayers that were said in here. Feel all the people who came through this space, our ancestors of spirit. Now pay attention to your breath. And know that you are breathing in what your neighbor is breathing out. Your neighbor is breathing in what you are breathing out. And it's safe to do that right now. That we are all connected. We are all dependent on each other. We are all part of each other. And that God is the connective tissue of the universe. We are connected through that energy, through that presence of God. God is our connection. God is our lifeblood. It is what unites us. This is a time for radical solidarity, knowing our connection. With the next inhalation, breathe in radical solidarity. Exhale out your love to each other, knowing that we can take this with us throughout the day. As we open your eyes.
So, when we talk about building power, right, having a power conversation, right? We're having a conversation about building the scale of power that we need to win. But that starts with what's at stake for you, right? Not for the people that you're pastoring or that you're serving as a faith leader over. Not merely for your family, although your family is important, but you personally, you. What's at stake for you in this? What's the cost of white Christian nationalism for you? Why are you here? Because if we're going to get people to come with us, we have to be clear on why we're showing up in the first place. And if we're going to build the kind of power that we need to win, we got to be clear on why it is we want that power. We got to be connected to our story. And so we're going to spend some time talking about each other's stories, listening to each other's stories, getting clearer on our story. But I've asked Brother Reza that if he could just model for us in his own life, in his own experience, why he's in this group, what's at stake for him, what motivates him to be involved in this struggle.
Thanks. All right, greetings of peace, everyone. My name is Reza Nikimanesh. I'm with Faith in Action National. So stories are important, right? I'm in a room with poets, with songwriters, with preachers, with people who put together art collectives. Because we understand that stories are important. And for all of us, we have different levels of stories that shape us into who we are and why we do what we do. Most of us, at least in this room, maybe not everybody, but at least in this room, most of us have a religious narrative, right? We have scripture, we have teachings, we have histories, we have leaders that we look up to that show us, or we read it in a way that shows us the world that we want to live in, right? So we read scripture and we read history so that we can understand our world. We have communal narratives, right? We have narratives about us as a people. We have narratives about our family. We have narratives about our society. And all of these have a great impact on our personal narrative. We all have a personal narrative. We all have a story. We all have a story that matters. And then we also have other people's stories around us that can impact us, and we can sprinkle them in our work along the way. But stories matter. My name is Reza. I'm the son of my parents. I'm the son of my father who migrated to the United States when he was 15 years old without his parents. Because of that and many other reasons, I grew up in a family, we struggled. We struggled economically. We struggled like anybody else struggles. But we had a struggle that impacted me so heavily that I didn't know how to think about myself or my role in society for a long time. One of my struggles is that we were Iranian Americans. And you guys don't need to be told, because you all know the reputation and the idea that the general public had against Iranians, or had, but at least had, right? I was born just a couple years before the revolution in Iran, and if you guys all recall the Iranian hostage crisis and what was happening to Iranians around the country. And there was a lot of other strife. Anyways, all of this strife and those stories, what they did is they forced my father to teach us to keep our heads down, to not say anything, to not shake the boat, to not make waves in the water. Just keep your head down, work hard, study hard, do good, be good with your family, be good to those around you, and don't do anything that might bring attention to us. Because like many immigrants, there are a lot of fears. There's fears of violence, there's fears of persecution, and you know what? There's fears of being kicked out. My dad didn't want to get kicked out. I grow into a young man, and you guys all know the thread or the streams of Islamophobia. It's not new, guys. I mean, it goes back to the founding of the nation, as Rabbi Mordecai pointed out. And it goes much further than that if you want to talk about European Islamophobia, right? But 9/11 kind of changed everything. Right? It wasn't new. There was already the bombing of the USS Cole. There was the original bombing of the World Trade Center.
Right.
But 9/11 hits. And here we are as a Muslim community scrambling to keep our heads low, to toe the line, to work hard, and to prove to everybody else that we were basically human beings that had the right to exist here. A ridiculous idea that we had to do that. Anyhow, I look back at the history of Muslims in America, and I'll come back to my story. Muslims have been here since before Columbus. Maybe some of you don't know that or don't want to know that, but Muslims were traveling here. African Moors were traveling here in the 1300s, trading with indigenous folks here. So we were coming here for a long time. 30% of those enslaved Africans were Muslim. Many of them did keep their faith all the way through. Migrants from other parts of the Muslim world were coming here over the next, couple centuries. There were huge booms of migration in the 1910s, the 1930s, the 1960s, the 1990s, and now 9/11 happens. And here we are, we're this new community that is an outsider and is not part of what makes America America. Because of many external factors, but an internal factor was that we never generally got involved because we all kept our head down and toe the line. We didn't build infrastructure, we didn't build organizations, we didn't get involved in educational systems, we just didn't get involved because that would bring attention to the family and it wasn't something we were willing to do. And 9/11 happens. Everything is up. We don't know what we're going to do. And we start having conversations. And I start asking myself, because actually much after that, much later than that, I got to say, I was the person that said if you vote, you're stupid. Because it doesn't matter. It doesn't make a difference. Right? I saw elections that the votes didn't matter. So that was me. And here I am trying to wrestle with the fact that now Muslims are having to deal with a greater threat of Islamophobia, that Muslim neighborhoods are being mapped. Sorry, Detective Jennings. I know we were talking about the Muslim mapping in New York City, right under Giuliani. We're thinking about mosques being infiltrated. We're talking about mosques being forced to hand over membership lists. And I started to think. And I started to ponder and think about how we were going to be able to change that. How we were going to be seen basically as a human being. How we were going to be able to make change. And again, I told you I didn't believe in voting, but I started to think, if voting didn't matter like I thought, then why did people pour so much money into, first of all, things they cared about? Why did people pour so much money to keep us away from the ballot box? Why were so many people in history killed, harassed, spat upon, and dehumanized just for trying to cast a ballot? And after having those kind of conversations with myself and my friends and family around me, we started to realize that it must matter. It must matter the way you check the box. And if it matters the way you check the box, us not checking the box for the last 100 years is probably the reason that we were victims so much more powerfully than we should have been after 9/11. So then I started to think and move forward. Now I flash forward to I'm much older, and I've been spending time organizing in the Muslim community, trying to get people to show up at polls, and like probably many of you in your communities, I'm told things like, that's not a Muslim issue. That issue doesn't affect our community. That's not really, it's one evil or the other. Like, I'm not going to vote for either evil. And I'm bombarded, and I just got to keep reminding, hey, as long as I'm in Fresno, California, as long as the 110,000 people in my valley or the 11 million people nationwide who are undocumented in this land don't have rights to just immigration policy, neither do you. If black and brown bodies, particularly black men, are continual violence, targets of violence from the police and from the state, then you're not safe. If people don't have the access to economic equity so they can just pay their rent, so that they can afford to live, then neither do you. If somebody doesn't have access to health care, and dignified health care, and the health care that's available to anybody that has access to such, then you don't either. And so, for me, I had to start thinking about all of those things, and it brought particularly to me. I have 2 sons. My 2 sons are coming up in this world, and I know that you say that's not my story. My sons are my story. My sons are me. They're part of me, just like any of you that have children. And I start to think about what kind of world I want my sons to grow in. Am I going to allow my sons to have to go through the same damn fights that I'm going through? Maybe they will, but I'm not going to let it be because I didn't try. Are my sons going to have access to health care? Maybe, maybe not, but not because I didn't try, they're not going to. Are my sons going to have to be worried and have to be told not to toe a line? Are my sons going to have to be afraid to shake the boat? Are my sons going to be afraid to say something or speak out because somebody might look at us bad? Or we might have to, no, not as long as I'm going to fight. And all of it becomes personal to me. Again, I got a personal story. I have my community narrative, which I share. I have a religious narrative. All of it is driven by my religion. The Quran is replete with verses about justice. The word justice, qas and adl, are the most repeated verses you can find in the Quran other than names of God. And adl is one of the names of God, the just. And it's throughout, clear. Ya ayyuhalladhina amanu kunu qawwamina bil qist. Oh, you who believe, stand up firmly to establish justice. It's clear, period. No question. The Prophet Muhammad, peace and blessings be upon him, he said that if you see an injustice in the land, if you see a wrong in the land, you got to stop it with your hands. You can't stop it with your hands, you got to speak out against it with your tongue. And if you can't speak out against it with your tongue, you got to hate it in your heart. But that's the lowest level of faith. I'm not trying to live at the lowest level of faith. Are you, Bishop? Are you, Rabbi? No, I'm not trying to live at the lowest level of faith. I'm trying to up that. Tongue and. That's all I'm going to work to make sure my kids have access to the life that I believe they have as a dignified creation of God.
She throws hands.
Before we give each other the chance to share and hear our stories, and without doing like a story voyeurism, so I don't want to do that with your story, Brother Reza, but I just want to ask a question to the room, maybe here from 2 or 3 people. I'm going to ask a common question, but I want to throw a slice. As Reza shared his story, what was going on in you in the slant as it relates to your own? Right? So not just observing what he shared and the impact it had on you, but as it relates to your own soul. Did you see yourself? Did you hear yourself? Did you identify with it? Did you see yourself telling your story the same way? I just want to hear from maybe 2 or 3 people who are willing to share.
So to first answer your question, absolutely. Like you couldn't help but to think about how you know, your narrative. But at the same time, at least for me, I was also thinking about how much I've silenced my narrative in my advocacy for other people. And so this, you know, his narrative actually gives that power back to say what your experience is as powerful as the people that you advocate for. Because I think often in my work, I'm always advocating for somebody. And so I'm a therapist too. So as a therapist, it's less you and it's more about the other person. But in this work, I feel like it's the reverse. I feel like, you know, what you're saying, you've got to bring your
And relating to what you were saying before about the, just what the dominant narratives are about. And, I was born in the 70s. What I was taught about the civil rights movement, for example, was like that it was as though it was something that started in the 1950s, maybe the 1940s, or whatever. And as someone who has been part of the William Goodrich Freedom Center here and has studied more and more of the background of my country's history, I got in a debate with my own mother the other night about things because she's very much focused on the founding fathers and the Scottish philosophers they were reading and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, and they were influenced by the Native Americans. And she was like, well, now don't retcon history. And so many people are like, you gotta do all this sort of stuff. I had one of my very good friends get mad at me because she was pushing the 1619 project, and I was like, it is so valuable, but at the same time, it ignores or pushes aside that long history of people traveling to and from this country before 1619, right? And we, as a nation, because of the dominant narrative that the white Europeans who were descended from very specific people wanted to teach about who made this country what it is. We didn't learn anything about the Spanish and the Portuguese and the Catholic Empire in the South and the Chinese who came over here and were enslaved. We didn't learn that Mexico City was once the most international cosmopolitan city in the world, because people didn't want us to know that. And I have a daughter, and I want her to not just have a good, safe place to live, but to understand those kinds of things, to have education that is not built around keeping one specific group in power, but also to have a land that understands what's happening to everybody and can be empathetic towards everybody and not just focused on, what's going to help my people who are here, who went to the same school that I did, who, came from the same country, or all that sort of stuff. We were talking about before about here at this table about the difference between the suburban and the city school districts here, and the money and all that sort of stuff. And you see so much this tendency toward, defining an us and a them, and being like, I will support us and not them, and it just, what you're all saying is just very much what I want to teach my daughter, that we are all us. And I've always.
So I want to give us a chance actually to break into pairs and share part of our stories with each other. Part of why I love organizing is because I think that is very sacred, because they're stories, as our Brother shared, they're the most true and intimate parts of ourselves. They're the parts that, we go to, right? When we feel fear, when we feel joy. And sharing that with someone is an act of worship in some ways. And listening to someone share their story is an act of worship, right? How often do we get the chance to be heard fully by someone who's fully tuned in to what we're saying? That's the beauty of organizing, is sharing our stories and having them received by somebody that can hold it and say, thank you. I see you in that, and I'm curious about it. I want to know more. What motivates you? So here's my ask. I'm going to give us 10 minutes apiece, break into pairs, and share a part of your story with the other person. If you are listening to the story, I would like you to consider reflecting back those parts of the story to the person sharing that you feel the most powerful about, that you see the body language shift for that person around, the face light up, the body posture lean in, whatever it is for that person. Be really curious about how they're telling it, and could you reflect it back to them? Because sometimes we need to hear that when we tell our stories. What are the most powerful parts of them? Because when y'all go out and you grow this room, I guarantee you that's the part of your story that's actually going to attract a lot of people. That's where the spiritual power happens in your story. first person share, and then listen, and we'll swap, and then after 20, we'll come back together and debrief that, and we'll move into the next section. Good? I would love that, actually, Pastor Carl. Yeah, so if there's a York, is it a York Tony? Yorker? Yorker, all right.
Did you say York Tony?
So Yorkers and freedom expressers / folks who are coming into town, maybe if we could pair off somebody you don't know, and do our story. Thank you.
Yorkies. I love that.
That's on video.
I love that.